Hello and welcome to episode number 2 of Stories of Learning, where we dive into the learning process and explore the amazing journey of learning. My background is music, so we'll have plenty of musicians on here, but not exclusively. We'll explore it all. The most important thing on this podcast is that these ideas of the learning process are applicable to every field. We just have to take those lessons and stories and apply them to our own worlds. Every episode we'll have a guest in to listen and hear all about their journey, their stories, and their approach to learning. Every week we'll be using the incredible book The Art of Learning by Josh Waitzkin to guide us through the episodes. Josh's book explores his process of learning as he discovered it through his life as a chess master and a Tai Chi Chuan martial artist. We'll explore his ideas and concepts to see how we can find them in our own worlds of learning. I'm a musician, so I see things through that lens, but these skills and concepts can be applied to anything. That is the beauty of learning. So I hope you'll enjoy this next episode of Stories of Learning as I welcome our next guest, Richard Cleveland. Thanks for joining me.
Sure.
Thanks for joining me.
Me.
Yeah, it's going to be cool. So why don't we just start with a little bit of kind of what you do and what you're about, and you can let everyone know the kind of stuff that you're up to.
Sure. My name is Richard Cleveland, and I founded and run a outdoor school in Western North Carolina called Earth School. And I teach wilderness survival skills, but it's really a lot more than that. It's reconnecting with the knowledge that our ancestors had about nature, about learning how to take care of yourself, God forbid, right? Learning about what plants you can eat, what you can use for medicine, how to make tools, and just having a whole lot of fun and noticing more. I think that's the main goal.
Yeah. So you have camps that you run yearly, or how often do they happen?
I do classes year round. It's
Okay.
Things generally slow down around Thanksgiving to Christmas, obviously.
Yeah.
But I have classes up till then, and I generally start up at least by the second week of January of the year, and have classes throughout the year.
Very cool. Very cool. Okay, so I want to just dive into the first segment that I have. I usually do 3 segments with everybody, and they are all from Josh Waitzkin's book, The Art of Learning. So the first segment that I want to dive into is called Innocent Moves. It's the first segment of Josh's book, and basically it talks about his discovery of chess when he was a young boy, 5 or 6 years old. So he kind of describes that initial jump into the learning process where he is totally new to it and everything is kind of new and interesting and exciting. So I was curious if you have any stories of, especially in your world of nature, any stories about that kind of bliss that comes from first discovery?
Well, gosh, yeah, lots of them. But, the story that I like to tell my students, just to give them a little bit of insight about me, is that when I was around 5 years old, my mom bought me a butterfly net for my 5th birthday. And I was so excited that she just about had to tie me to a chair to keep me from leaving all of my friends that came to my parties.
That's
Because
awesome.
I wanted to just try it out. I wanted to start catching stuff. You see dragonflies and butterflies and all kinds of insects, but you don't always get a close look at them. And so, like, look out, world. Richard's got a net. And that's what I did. And I got really curious about nature by doing that. And my parents bought a set of World Book encyclopedias from some door-to-door salesman. And I wore out several of those books, particularly ones about insects and animals.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I got my start. And it's still going on. It's never stopped.
After doing just a few of your kind of rotations at Victor's camp, I could definitely see how that, as soon as you're introduced to it and kind of start to see the things that you haven't seen or that you haven't noticed, it can open up that door for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it does.
So how do you, like, have you ever needed to try and keep that sense, or have you just always had it? How do you kind of, I guess, try and inspire it in your students as well?
First off, I think for the first part of your question, like once it's turned on, it's it's very difficult to turn it off.
Hmm.
And I've never wished for it to be turned off, but you just automatically notice things because as you've heard me state in some of the rotations, you know, once you see something or are introduced to something, you have a reference to it, you have a file for it,
Mm-hmm.
and we are constantly all day long we're matching up files, whether it's visually, audibly, um, things that we touch. We're always matching up files. And what you've heard me say in the past too is that, you know, I wonder if we don't have a file for something, if we even notice it, say visually. Like plants are a good example.
Yeah.
We walk by a plant that we don't recognize, but do we really pay attention to it, or do we glance over to the plant next to it, which we know, and go, "Oh, look, there's clover, or there's dandelion."
Yeah.
Um, and what was the second part of your question?
How do you,
Oh, how do I get people to do that?
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Something. Actually, that part's easy because once I can show people things that are right in front of them, they start to develop these files too, and they start to get curious, and they can't turn it off.
Hmm.
And I've had that happen. I've been teaching now for 26 years and counting,
Yeah.
and like that's my dopamine is like seeing people, you know, take their blindfolds off that they didn't even know they were wearing.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
get so many emails and calls from people saying, "Oh my God, they're literally finding things right around their house that they've never seen before, and they've walked past them thousands and thousands of times."
Yeah. Yeah. And then, yeah, like you said, once you open that door, it's open.
It's like this is probably a common analogy that people use. The whole red pill, blue pill thing, right?
Yeah.
But that's what it's like. It's like
Yeah.
once you swallow that red pill and that blindfold comes off, you can't go back.
Hmm.
There's just no way that you can.
Yeah. Well, that leads into my second section,
Mm-hmm.
which is, I call it Finemans Birds. And this is actually the first segment that I'm going to do that's not from Josh's book, but it comes from a pretty well-told story of Richard Feynman. Richard Feynman's a physicist, and I'll tell basically a short version of the story. Is he talks about when he was young and he was going on walks with his dad and stuff like that. His dad would show him things about the birds and other things that they encountered. But one of Richard's friends at one point pointed out that, oh, like your dad doesn't tell you anything, he doesn't show you anything about the birds because Feynman didn't know the names for them,
Right.
right? So there's an awesome quote here from Feynman where he says, "You can know the name of a bird in all the languages of the world, but when you're finished, you'll know absolutely nothing about the bird. So let's take a look at the bird and see what it's doing. That's what counts." So like you mentioned earlier, we kind of go around taking files of different things. So what's your thoughts on that in terms of knowing the name for something, but then not knowing anything about it really?
Well, this is also something that I learned years ago, and I've been teaching ever since. Is that we were taught in school that if we know the name of something, that we know it, you
Mm.
know, but so we can pass our test, et cetera, et cetera. But it doesn't tell us anything about it. For instance, again, it's like we can know everything about an oak, or we can recognize an oak tree, but
Yep.
not necessarily know what family it's in. We don't know if it's in the red oak, the white oak, the black oak family. We don't know what the wood smells like in the different species. We don't know what kinds of plants grow around its base or even can grow around its base. What kinds of animals eat the acorns, what we can do with the acorns. Can we eat them? Can we use them medicinally?
Yeah.
What kinds of animals like to nest or hole up in the tree cavities or in the branches? There's layers and layers upon experiments of learning what that oak tree really is. And school, our public school especially, does not address that. Very little or none of our public schooling has anything to do whatsoever with hands-on experience.
Yeah. So that's one of the things that you obviously spend your time in at your camps, is really like diving in deep to what these things are, and just that kind of ability of looking deeply, and developing that curiosity to question things, I think.
That's a big one right there.
Yeah.
Get curious. Most people just don't. And yet with the internet, we have a virtual library at our fingertips. You can Google anything.
Yeah.
Or search for anything and then spend hours reading about it. And, that's a double-edged sword. It keeps us from going to the library. God forbid we should actually pick up a book. But that's what it is some people I think are born with that innate curiosity and questioning.
Yeah.
And like many other people just don't question anything. Like going, oh, I saw it on the news or science that said this, and so it must be true.
Yeah.
So, I think that's an important point that you made.
Yeah. And I've heard Victor and I've heard you talk about the concept of coyote teaching.
Mm-hmm.
Do you mind just telling us a little bit about kind of how that works? Because it definitely goes in the same line of this logic, right?
It does. It's, classic example is, think about your schoolrooms throughout your life. Mm-hmm. And, you have a question about something and, the teacher answers your question. In other words, you don't even have to look for it.
Yeah.
Coyote teaching in its very root essence is saying, how bad do you want to know? There's a book over there. Why don't you go see if you can match it up? See if you can find out in that book what kind of track that is or what kind of leaf that is from what particular tree. And then read about it so that you can learn more about it. Now, in the negative, I've also seen coyote teaching. I've seen teachers, say things like that when in fact they don't even know the answer themselves. It's almost like an excuse to just say, oh, well, you're telling me that, you're too lazy to go find out for yourself. And that's just not the case. But it's, coyote teaching is encouraging students, encouraging people to find out the truth themselves. Even if it's different than what you perceive as the truth, that's okay. Find it out for yourself and care enough to do so.
I definitely use that, or I try to use that method a lot with my students. Just asking their questions with questions, to be super simplistic about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so then my last segment that I have in this area is a segment called Making Sandals. So this is near the end of Josh's book, and I'll start with a quote from him. He says, "To walk a thorny road, we may cover its every inch with leather, or we can make sandals."
Right.
So this quote is about experiencing emotions, letting them inside, instead of letting them inside, trying to push them away and put up walls against them. So I heard you tell a story at Victor's camp, I think it was a couple of years ago now, about finding out at the end of the road that all that we believed in was true versus it being a lie. I was hoping that you could share that story if you remember what I'm
Sure, I
referring
do.
to. Yeah.
It's the way that I usually start the story is, you know, talking about plants, basically.
Yeah.
And, you know, the Native Americans, particularly, I live in Western North Carolina, which was Cherokee country, Cherokee land. And we have tremendous biodiversity here in the mountains, probably the best in the entire country for sure. There's
Yeah.
more varieties of edible and medicinal plants here than anywhere. And the settlers, when they encountered the Cherokees, were amazed at the knowledge, the intimate knowledge that the Cherokees had of these plants for for medicines especially. And the way that I've heard the story is that they were frequently asked, "How did you learn this stuff? Did you just try it out on people and see if it worked?" And the Cherokees, unlike probably what you hear from all traditional Native cultures, would just look at them baffled and say, "No, we learn this from the plants.
Hmm.
The plants teach us this. They're our teachers, just like everything teaches us." And of course, that blows away our Western minds, the way that we're raised. Like, well, that's not scientific, so that can't be true, right?
Yeah.
But to me, it comes down to a choice, right? Science can't prove that we can communicate with plants.
Hmm.
But as I like to say, I don't really care. I don't need their permission to believe in what I want to believe. Because if I choose to believe in that all things are connected, that's my choice. And so the story that you heard me say um, continues like this. It's like, what if you chose to believe that all things are connected and that, chose to believe in beautiful things and endless possibilities, right? See the beauty in everything and everybody.
Yeah.
You probably had a pretty good life. You probably had a lot of friends and blah, blah, blah. But what if you chose to believe that and then on your deathbed, in your last breaths, you were shown or proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that you were mistaken, that all things are not connected? What have you lost? Actually, I don't think you've lost much at all.
Yeah.
Because again, you had a lot of friends, you had really good relationships, both business and personal. People probably love to be around you because of your excitement for just looking at nature and looking at everything, seeing the best in everything. You've lost nothing. But now, flip that coin.
Yeah.
What if you chose not to believe in these possibilities, these beautiful, wonderful possibilities? And then on your deathbed, you were shown beyond a shadow of a doubt that you were wrong, you were mistaken, and that all things are connected or were connected.
Yeah.
What have you potentially missed then?
Yeah, exactly.
Whew.
Yeah.
A lot.
Exactly.
Pretty much.
Well, thanks for sharing that. That I always thought that was a really awesome story.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So then I want to jump into our kind of lightning round of questions, and I call these questions to make questions, which is again that kind of coyote mentality. So I'm just gonna. These are super broad, and you could go super deep with it, but it's just to kind of get people that are listening to think about these questions themselves and what would their answers be. So the first one is, what is your life's intention?
My life's intention is to reconnect people with nature. That's what I believe. That's what I believe I was put here for. And it took me a long time to figure that out. It's like when I was young, I wanted to be a conservation officer, wildlife conservation officer.
Yeah.
And everyone, of course, when you want to do such things, not everyone, but a lot of people will go, "Oh, you'll never be able to do that. There's not enough money in it." And da, 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 da. And here I am, I just turned 60 years old, and I'm teaching people about nature for a living.
There you go.
And so, that's the only thing that feels right to me, Jordan, at this point.
Yeah.
And of course, I met you at Victor's camp,
Yep.
and that opportunity has been wonderful for not just you and me, but just for everyone in general. It's sharing some of the beautiful things in nature.
Yeah, and I got to go to the tracking weekend this past year, and that was really interesting because for anyone that doesn't know, at Victor Wooten's camp in Nashville, usually there's music classes, and then Richard does nature rotations as well through the day. So it's music and nature. But the tracking weekend was really nice because it was all nature. And we just tracked, we kind of looked at animal tracks and explored how they work and how to follow them and stuff. And yeah, it was really cool. And I see that there's going to be another one coming up next year as well.
Mm-hmm.
Very exciting. The next question is then, you kind of already answered it, which is, where is your life's attention?
Yeah. Right there. It's in nature. It's the one thing that we all share. The one thing that all cultures have in common is our relationship with nature. And if you went back far enough in time, and I don't care where your ancestors originated from, at one point they were very tribal and lived very much like the Native Americans did in North and South America.
Yeah. So last lightning round question.
Mm-hmm.
What do you know for sure?
That's a good one.
Yeah. That one, the more you think about it, the more you don't know.
Yeah. And I think that's healthy too. It's like, I could state what I believe are facts and figures and things like that.
Yeah.
But the only thing that we really know is how we feel about certain things. Right? We know what our feelings are.
Yeah.
I think it's very healthy for you to constantly question what you think you know.
Yeah.
Because that changes. Science is not written in stone. Science by its very nature should never be settled. It should always be debatable. It should always be open to new findings. And it's the same way with ourselves, I think. It's like, you can, what you think you know, you should always question it. You should always be open to learning something new. And some people are not very comfortable with that. Yeah. But I know how I feel about nature, and I know how it makes my heart sing, literally.
Yeah.
And so if there's one thing I know, it's that heartfelt love for nature in general.
Awesome. I have one last segment then.
Sure.
And the last segment is from actually from a Kurt Vonnegut lecture, where he's explaining the kind of different types of story arcs that we have. And the point that he brings up at the end is in real life, like in our lives, it's really hard to tell what the good news is and what the bad news is. So his point is to kind of just, in a sense, just get on with it. And since you can't tell either way, to just take it as you will and try and gain something from the experience, right? So do you have a story about that kind of thing where you thought something was bad news and it turned out good, or the opposite of that?
Well, I've got a bunch of stories, but I don't know that I have one specifically on that topic. I mean, most of the things that we think are bad, that think are going to happen to us, never happen in the first place. It's just, what we have a choice in is we can choose how we react to things.
Yeah.
And, poop is always going to fly at us from every angle through our entire lives. It just depends on whether we want to dodge it or catch it.
Yeah. Well, then that's pretty much all I have. So that's really good.
Well, nice.
Yeah. Thank you for being on here.
Well, gosh, I appreciate you having me. it's always a pleasure to, to be able to kind of reach out and, maybe touch a few people and encourage them to get their butt outside and go play in nature, because it's always there.
Yeah.
And it's always very, very healing for me.
Well, I'm gonna post links in the episode show notes for your school,
Oh, thank you.
and that way people can check it out, and and yeah, hopefully you'll see some new faces from from the podcast at your courses.
Awesome.
Cool. Well, thank you so much.
All right.
All right.
All right, Jordan. Thank you again, and have a beautiful day, my friend.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
That wraps it up for this second episode of Stories of Learning with Richard Cleveland. I hope that you all enjoyed it, and I hope that you look Richard up. He has an amazing camp that he teaches at, and he teaches at Victor Wooten's camp as well. So check out his links that I'll post in the show notes, and I hope you get to learn from him directly someday. Thank you so much for listening. If you like the podcast, be sure to leave a comment on the YouTube link or a review on iTunes or whatever you can do to share it or like it or anything like that. That definitely helps a lot so that other people can check it out. All right, and we'll see you again next time.